The teaching text for today is Matthew 5, verse 23 through 24. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. You may now be seated.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. My name is David Black. I'm the campus pastor here, and if we have not met, I just want to welcome you to Grace. And if it's your first time here, something we say often is that we live to make Jesus make sense. And what that means is if you are a follower of Jesus, it's our hope that when you come in, especially on a Sunday morning, that the largest thing and the loudest thing that we're celebrating and saying is Jesus, who he is, and his story, and the good news that he brings. If you are exploring Jesus, what we hope for you is that as you come in, we know that's not an easy thing or something you just enter into lightly, but our hope would be that he is the star of the show and that you get to explore who he is and ask questions with a group of people, hopefully, and travel together in doing that. Just to give you an idea of what we do every week, this is the part of the service or the gathering where we open up God's Word. We call it his heart, and we see what his heart has to say about our heart. And we've been doing that in what we call series or a long period of time. And so we just recently wrapped up a series where we spent about 6 to 7 weeks in one chapter on love. And we called it What Love Is. And next week, we're going to start a series that will take us all the way through the Christmas season that has to do with the birth of Christ and literally what Christmas is about. And so if you're curious and you're like, hey, where did the word Christmas come from? I know that Jesus Christ is there, but it's not his name. It's actually a title. And so at Christmas, we don't just celebrate a name, we celebrate a title and an idea that's attached to that person in Jesus. And you're going, okay, well, what does that mean? And where did that come from? We're going to cover that starting next week, leading all the way through Christmas. And maybe just as a matter of housekeeping, before we jump into what we're doing today, if you are someone who lost someone, either this year or if you've lost someone in your life, here's what you know to be true, that the Christmas season, especially the holidays, is a difficult time. And so we think at Grace Church that grief is universal. It's also not something that people should not talk about. And what I mean by that is if you're grieving, it's a good thing to grieve, and you should not do it alone. And so something we do here every year is we have a remembrance gathering, a remembrance service. That's happening December 8th in the evening. Announcements will tell you a little bit more about that. But just as a pastor, I want you to know that's not just for you. It's not just for you if you attend Grace Church. It's for friends, it's for neighbors. And so if you have someone at work even who's lost someone and you're trying to figure out, man, I know they've lost someone. I don't really know how to say, I know you're having a hard time, or maybe you're having a hard time this holiday season. But this might be an opportunity for you to say, hey, I know you've lost someone. We actually just take some time out to remember that corporately together. And so it's a special service, about an hour long. It's in the evening, December 8th. Maybe just to put that on your radar, I'll remind you again next week as that comes up. Something we're doing today a little bit different than what we normally do is we're just going to do a one-off, standalone message. And so as I was praying about what we were to cover and what we're going to do this week, I was trying to think of maybe we'll do something on Thanksgiving because we're headed to Thanksgiving and what it means to be grateful, and that's good. I also thought maybe we do something about just even contentment with what we have or just that kind of generosity in general. I also thought maybe we could talk about, who we are as a church and where we're headed into next year. But as I started thinking about it and just kind of going back over through some things, I really landed on this topic here, okay? And I'm just going to warn you, it's going to push you a little bit. This is what we're talking about just for this morning. We're talking about conflict, okay? So if someone invited you today, they had no idea we were talking about this, just to give you a heads up. You say, well, why in the world are we talking about conflict before Thanksgiving and the holidays? Why would we do that? Are you saying that the holidays and Thanksgiving and Christmas and family and dinner tables, all of that tends to drag up conflict? Is that why we're talking about conflict ahead of time? Yes, that's one of the reasons why. But here's the other reason why. I just want to tell you why. Because out of our love series, which we did, we talked about a love that's different than what we find in this world. And we were challenged as a church to consider what that might look like as followers of Jesus. The number one question that we got as a pastoral staff from everyone in the church, or from those in the church, as we went through the love series is this: I realize I'm not that type of loving, and I could do better at it. Or the other side, I realize someone has not been that way with me. And the number one question was, what do I do now? Okay, so just recognizing that there's conflict in life. And so here's what today is. Today is a little bit of a commercial. 5 years ago, before the pandemic, so don't even try to remember, right? But 5 years ago, we did a series called Resolve. And you can actually go back online, and there's actually about 7 to 8 messages about how do we resolve conflict together. This is one of the most requested conversations by leaders and core community groups. That's biblical community that we do. It's also one of the most referenced ones to like staff people as we're walking through this. And so here, if what I talk about this morning is interesting to you at all, and if you're going, man, I'd like to know a little bit more, you didn't really help me out as much as I thought you were going to help me out. In fact, why don't you just solve my conflict for me, which is why most people come to a pastor anyways, just to be honest sometimes. They're like, could you do it? I'm like, no, but sometimes that's why we go to other people. I would encourage you to go on our app or go on the website and actually look this up. And if you have, I don't know, say a 9-hour drive to Michigan, and you want to just prep yourself, it might be good if you got a long trip coming up. So here's my goal today. We're just going to do the introduction. So if you go back to the series and you're like, you can skip week 1. You got it, okay? But there's several others after that. And here's what you probably already know if you've lived as an adult. And even if you just started thinking about conflict. Conflict is unavoidable. It's unavoidable. When we talk about conflict resolution, especially, it's something that's almost immediately applicable. And so this morning, I just want to be clear. I'm not aiming this at anyone. Okay? Like if you walked in, you're like, did he know? Did you tell him that we were fighting? No, okay? I'm not aiming this at anybody, but it is for everyone. Right? It's for everyone. Because we all understand, hopefully, that conflict is unavoidable. In fact, if you're a roommate, you know this. Right? Because there's that whole like, when are the bills due? And hey, you didn't do the dishes. Or hey, you keep leaving trash everywhere. Or I've got some friends coming over. Could you vacuum? Or maybe like, hey, keep your room stuff in your room, right? Like, or I don't know. Like if you've lived with anyone, you know there's going to be some level of conflict. If you're married, you know that conflict is unavoidable. Whether it's who sleeps on what side of the bed or which way the toilet paper roll goes, right? Or where do the dishes go when they come out? I mean, if you've grown up in one home and household where you kept dishes in a certain place and your spouse grew up in another home and you suddenly get married, you have to decide, where do the dishes go? And sometimes that's 2 weeks. And sometimes that's 5 years. And some of you are still secretly fighting that fight, right? When you race to do the dishwasher. Conflict, right, that's pretty lighthearted, is unavoidable in marriage, but it's there. Or conflict at work, right? Maybe there's that individual at work that no one really overtly says is the issue, but everyone kind of knows is the issue. And when you pull into work and you see the car in the parking lot, you go, oh, or if you don't see the car, you're like, yes, good day, right? Excellent Monday. And so there's this thing, and everyone kind of just tiptoes around it, but it's there. I don't know, maybe you go to a church. There's conflict in the church. Do you know why there's conflict in the church? Because people are at the church, right? And you're like, I know that's the problem. That's why I don't like church. I don't like people. But hey, it's both the best thing and the worst thing about church. And it's how it works. There's conflict everywhere we go. It's unavoidable. So what today is not going to be, here's what today is not going to be. Today is not going to be about how do I avoid conflict. Okay? In fact, today we're going to talk about how you respond to conflict. And so before we get to the Bible, which I promise we're going to get to, today's just a little bit different. It's an introduction, right? Before we get to the Bible, I thought I'd just ask you this question. How do you respond to conflict? Because I think if we're to be honest, we all kind of come pre-wired in some way with the response. And so I brought some pictures up here just to give you an idea. Maybe you fight. Maybe that's your response. Like, you might be one of the people who's wired in such a way that when conflict comes up, you're like, all right, here we go. And you've got charts and graphs, or you start tying your shoes, right? Or because you've been training for this your whole life. You're like, this is it. I was built for it. I was ready for it. And I think with any one of these responses, we're going to take a look at 4, but any one of these 4 responses that we might find ourselves in, there's an upside to it, and there's probably also a downside. And so I think the upside, if you're someone who's like your natural inclination is to fight, you're just like always ready for it, you're always prepared. You've got the list. You're like, all right, we're doing it. Let me get out my book. So you open your book, you're ready to go. I think if the upside to that is, if there is an upside, it's this, that you probably are somebody who does not let things fester. You're like, I don't like things just hanging out. I'm ready to deal with it. I'm ready and willing to do that. But if there's a downside, it might be this. That in your effort and in your willingness to enjoy or embrace, let's say, conflict, right? That maybe perhaps you try to win the argument and never win the person. Or maybe you run over people. Or maybe people don't have enough time to think or process it. And you might railroad people in that way. Some of you might say, okay, yeah, that's me. But others of you might go, that's not me at all. And maybe you fall into this category. I thought this picture would be the most helpful here. What is this? Run, Forrest, run, right? And so maybe you're someone who naturally, when conflict comes up, you're going, and you leave, right? I've got a dog that I need to have let out, right? And so you leave. Or this is how we leave now, right? I'm here. I'm not here anymore, right? We do that. Or maybe you block someone, or you move, or you just change friend groups, or you ghost someone, or you just actually move churches, right? We live in an age where you can just easily never have to deal with the people who you have to deal with, right? And some of you have friends who are like, when are you going to be done dealing with that person? And I'm not saying that there are certainly not times for you to extricate yourself out of a situation, but this would be like your natural response. And again, if there's an upside to this aspect of conflict, it's probably this, that you're not really looking for a fight. That you're like, hey, I don't really want to, do we really have to talk about that? It's not a big deal to me, right? And maybe it's not a big deal to you. You're just, I'm not going to do that. But if there's a downside, it might be this, that you're constantly moving and leaving behind you unresolved relationships. And so you're always on the move. You're float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. I'm hard to catch and hard. And so there might be in your wake a list of names or friendships or church communities or work environments or dating relationships in which you've just kind of moved on. And things are really, really good right now in your life because it's new. But here's what you find, that wherever you go, it seems to always happen again. And maybe it's just a matter of time. Okay, so we could fight or we could flee. And there's this third one, which I read about, and I don't think it's as common known as fight and flight, but it's this one right here. This is appeasement. And the reason there's Band-Aids up here is because maybe you're the type of person that when conflict arises, you feel the need to fix it. And this need to fix it isn't just one for maybe yourself, but it's for all parties involved. Maybe, I'm not going to ask you by show of hands, but maybe you're the fix-it person in your family, okay? Middle children, if that's you, you're here. Maybe you're the person who's going, everyone fights in my family, and my role is to run around with the med kit and patch everything up. And so when things come up in your office or things come up in your life or in your family or in your marriage, you're going, I need to like Band-Aid it, right? And you're doing your best to Band-Aid it. And maybe that means sometimes saying the thing to a person that everyone else won't say to them. Because you're like, I'll do it. Fine, I'll be the one to voice it because no one else will. Let's just get it over with. Or maybe that means that you're the person who doesn't say the thing to the person that everyone else is saying. And they're going, I don't know why everyone's mad. And you're like, can't imagine why, right? But really deep down, you're just throwing a Band-Aid on it, hoping that it goes by. Now, I think one of the things that would be an upside to this is that you're probably somebody who has a higher social EQ than other people. Maybe you're sensitive to the needs and the desires of others. Maybe you're somebody who recognizes that there are people in your life that have different needs, right? And you're sitting there and going, oh, if that person would just see that this person is not that person, we'd be better off, and everyone could get along. But if there's a downside to it, it's this, that you might actually be bearing the burden of conflict more than the people in the relationship who are causing the conflict. And so you tend to have the cost and the scars and the weight of the relationship, while the people who are actually fighting with each other are just going like, it's a great day. And you're like, it's a horrible day. How are you guys holding it together? Thankfully, you got me, right? That's how that works sometimes. Okay? Now just look, I'm going to try to do this as best as I can without like stepping on your toes, okay? But I'm going to ask you for some audience participation, and I'm going to try to push this as far away as I can, okay? If hypothetically, maybe, if there's a 2% chance that you have seen yourself on the screen so far, and you're willing to raise your hand, okay? Would you do that? If anything that we've talked about, right? Anybody, this is our, okay, look around. Okay, great, thank you so much. You can put your hands down. If you did not raise your hand, I bet this last one is you, okay? This one right here. Anybody know what this is? This is denial. This is denial, right? It's fine. Everything's fine. We're all fine. Right? Hey, you guys good? Yes, right? Like, and for you, you're just like, it's not a big deal. Why are we always doing this? And maybe the upside is that it takes a while for you to actually get annoyed. Or it takes a while. It's going to take a big thing to rock the boat. You're like, you know what? We can live with it. We can deal with it. And maybe in your best sense, you're just trying to overlook it and keep moving. But if there's a downside, it's this, that at some point you fail to realize and recognize that everybody has a limit. Everybody has a limit. And unfortunately, maybe what the people around you may be willing to say to you later, but not necessarily right now, would be that at some point when your limit actually is met, here's what happens. Everyone know? Right here. Kaboom, right? Because we all go, it's fine until we're not. And it's not just one thing, right? Because then it's a lot of little things or a lot of big things. And then, Lord help the person who's nearby. It could be your Uber driver, right? And you're just like, that's it. And it goes off. Now, you're like, is this a church? Aren't we going to open the Bible? Yeah, we will get to the Bible. But again, I just kind of wanted to help find ourselves, because here's what I think all of us would recognize. And I'm willing to bet that none of us, whoever we are on the screen, I bet most of what we respond to and how we respond to is actually caught, not taught. What I mean by that is you probably didn't go to a counseling session growing up. Maybe you did, but you probably didn't go to a class where they said, here's how you're going to work, and here's how you're going to respond to conflict. You're going to run, right? Because that class isn't being taught, right? Here's how you're going to respond to a conflict. You're going to appease everybody. You're just going to stuff it down inside. Like that's not something that we teach. In fact, it's something that we caught. And here's what I would wager, that most of us, when it comes to your conflict resolution or your response to conflict or how you respond to conflict, it's either in response to or reaction from maybe something you grew up with. And so maybe it's like, I will never be like fill in the blank, Aunt Phyllis, right? Because Aunt Phyllis always ran away from it, so I'm going to fight, right? Or, hey, I'm never going to be like dad. Right? And so there's probably something in there that comes from someone else. Here's what I'm saying. The Bible, Jesus, has a lot to say about how you respond to conflict. And here's what I think is so powerful. That when it comes to the fact that conflict is unavoidable, I think it's entirely possible that if we let God have a say in our life and begin to poking around, I think, in fact, what the Bible teaches is so counterintuitive and relationally important that it has an ability to have lasting impact on our relationships. In your marriage, in your work relationships, in your dating relationships, in your employer-employee relationships, and even in your relationship with God. And so here's what I'd like to do with the rest of our time. I actually would propose that what the Bible is saying to us is that when it comes to conflict, we cannot afford to let it fester. In fact, the Bible would say this, I think, and here's what we'll see, that conflict left unresolved is incredibly costly. So conflict's unavoidable, but left unresolved is incredibly costly. And the Bible would recognize this. And so what I would like to do is just quickly give you a survey of a few passages of Scripture that might indicate where it would be costing you, okay? And then maybe give you a path forward, if you so choose. And so when we look at the Scripture, the Bible's going to say, I think, a lot, but I think we could classify it in maybe like 3 categories. We're going to look at conflict, and avoiding it and fighting it and not resolving it has a cost. And the Bible's going to indicate, I think, first and foremost, that when we ignore conflict, that it actually has the potential to affect your personal wellness, right? Or even a right relationship with yourself. That if we just ignore it, it actually does more harm to you than actually working through it and resolving it. In fact, in James chapter 3, verse 16, the author, who's a half-brother of Jesus, who didn't come to know Jesus as Lord or King until after Jesus was raised from the dead, because that makes sense. If your half-brother said he was God, you'd go like, nah, right? But then if he rose from the dead, you're like, well, maybe, I guess, right? So it's James. James writes to a church, and here's what he says. For where jealousy and strife are, right, there will be disorder and every vile practice. That word strife there literally means conflict. So when you take a look at this verse, you see the word disorder there. Literally, this means instability, confusion, and dysfunction. And what James is saying is that there's places in our life where we go, man, that's just a mess. That's just chaotic. What's going on? And James goes, it could be that behind that area of your life where there's no peace and there's no rest and there's just things flying all over the place, that there could be some strife or some envy or what we would just call plain old unresolved conflict. And you're going, I don't really want to deal with it, and I don't really want to mess with it because it's not really hurting anybody. But what you fail to realize or recognize might be that it's actually hurting yourself. If you're going, well, why do I feel like things are so up in the air? And why do I feel like things are just not tethered? Well, it could be that at its root, there's conflict. In fact, writing about this, a follower of Jesus named Frederick Buechner wrote this. He said, to lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll over your tongue the prospect of bitter confrontations still to come, to savor to the last toothsome morsel both the pain you are given and the pain you are giving back. In many ways, it is a feast fit for a king. So he's recognizing that sometimes it's actually more fun and enjoyable not to resolve it. But then he says this, the chief drawback is that what you are wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you. I think he's right. I think what he's saying is what James is trying to get across to the church that he's writing to. That where there's strife and envy unresolved, it actually creates a lot of chaos. In fact, there's a verse in Ephesians where Paul, the first missionary of the early church, he's writing to a church, and he says this, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil." And so maybe you heard this, especially if you've been through premarital counseling, which in Georgia, you get a discount on your marriage certificate if you do that. So even if you're not a follower of Jesus, there's a chance that you've done that. But this verse normally comes up because someone says, what this means is you shouldn't go to bed angry, okay? Which means you should do your best to resolve your conflicts before you actually have to sleep in the same bed. Might be a good idea, right? Which, by the way, I think is decent sound advice. I do think there are times in marriage where, you know what I'm talking about, if you are married, or if you had parents, you probably experienced this too, right? There's just some conflict that's so like deep entrenched, or if it starts at 11 p.m., like you're like, by the time it's 2 a.m., you're not even making any sense anymore, right? You're saying things you didn't want to say. Somebody else is like, we're 5 like metaphors deep and you can't keep track anymore. At some point you have to go, you know what? Let's set a date and have some coffee. Tomorrow at lunch, you got to work, I got to work, the kids got to do all this stuff. At some point tomorrow or maybe Wednesday, we will sit down and we will work together to resolve that. Sometimes that needs to happen. Why? Because you're human and you need to go to bed. Okay? Sometimes that needs to happen. But really, I think what's interesting here is he's saying you need to work hard to resolve conflict in your life because, look at this next section right here. He says, give no opportunity to the devil. Some King James version back in the day, it actually says, don't give the devil or the enemy a foothold. A foothold. What's a foothold? Well, if you're a climber, or if you know anyone who climbs, it's an area at which you can actually create a lot of leverage for your upward ascent. And so it's important when you're climbing to keep 3 points of contact to the face of whatever it is you're climbing. And so as you're going, you're constantly looking and planning your route ahead of time. And sometimes you get to a point where you may be stuck or you're kind of, I only got 2 points. And you're reaching down with your foot and you're trying to find a spot where it can bear the weight. And so what you might have someone do on the ground is actually guiding your foot to a place that you can't see, a little bit over to your left, a little bit over your right. Okay, there it is. And when you find it, you're able to put weight on it, and then you're able to get leverage to go further where you're headed. And thank you, yep. A veteran climber right there. Pastors, don't make up stuff. You can fact check me. So you're trying to do this. And what he's saying is this, that when you leave conflict unresolved in your marriage, or when you leave it unresolved in your church, or when you leave it unresolved in your friend group, or you leave it unresolved at your work, he's like, here's what's happening. You're actually creating a leverage point for the enemy. If you want to give the enemy leverage in your marriage, don't resolve conflict. If you want to give the enemy leverage in your family, don't resolve conflict. If you want to give the enemy leverage, right, for the future movement of what he intends to do in your church, don't resolve conflict. It's very, very important because it has the effect to actually affect our personal wellness. I think the Bible is also going to tell us that not only does it affect our personal wellness, but that it has the potential to affect relational wholeness, or a right relationship with others. And to be honest, I think this is the one that we all tend to think of first when we think about why we would want to resolve conflict. Because I think at some point we've all felt this relational strain, or we've all caused it in some form or fashion in our life. So we'd recognize that on either side, this is an issue. In fact, the author of Hebrews, chapter 12, writes it this way. He says, strive for peace with everyone, and for holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. Now, just real quick, notice how strong this first section is. Strive for peace with people you like. Nope. Strive for peace with the family members that are your favorites. Nope. Strive for peace with just those in your friend group. No. He says strive. meaning work hard at, exert effort and energy to find peace at with whom? Everybody. Everybody? That's a full-time job. Correct. Right. Strive for it. In fact, Paul, again, writing to the church in Rome, writes and says this way, hey, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. He's saying the exact same thing. He's saying try to do this because your conflict actually has the ability to affect others. In fact, I love the way that Hebrews puts it in this section right here in this verse. It says, make sure that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble. I had a magnolia tree in the backyard of our house when we first purchased it. And this was a funky magnolia tree because what happened at one point was that someone decided to cut down the magnolia tree in the center. So they cut the trunk. But then what happened was the roots grew up out around it. And so I had this like weird outward magnolia shell with nothing on the inside. And we're like, we would like that spot for a swing set. So I had someone come and take it down. They took everything down, but I'm cheap, and so I said, hey, leave the stump. I'll take care of it, right? Which, if you're married and your husband says he'll take care of it, that means 7 years later, maybe there might be some movement on that, right? But I was like, I'll do this, and I got on YouTube, and I found that you could burn it out, which is why not, right? So I drilled a bunch of holes in the stumps of all this magnolia tree that was left, and I put 70 pounds of coal around it and a ton of lighter fluid, and we had some fun, right? We just lit it, and I'm out there all day, right? My wife's like, what are you doing? Anyways, I do this. It doesn't work at all, right? It didn't do anything. It just created like a charred stump that was there. And I'm like, well, maybe, how long do I have to sit out here and babysit this stump? And so eventually I caved, and I went and I ordered some guy to bring out a stump grinder, and he came and he in 2 seconds, and Lauren's like, see, I got it, and it's gone, and it totally took it out. And I was like, did you make sure you get all of it? He's like, yeah, I got all of it. Now, why? Why do we want to get all of it? Because you know this as well as I do. If you don't get all of it, the important part isn't even the part that you can see. The important part is the what? It's this right here. The roots. In fact, if you click this, it'll circle the roots. Nope, maybe not. Okay. There it goes. Hey, that part right there. He's saying it's what's left underneath the surface. And so what the author of Hebrews is saying is this. He or she is saying, look, at some point, followers of Jesus, we don't leave stumps. What we do is we actually work hard to get underneath and get underground and work it all out and come to some conclusion. Why? Because we know that those roots aren't just roots. They're potential seeds for a whole orchard of other things. And so dig it up, drill holes in it, bring 70 pounds of charcoal and lighter fluid, and or call a guy, right? Get it out. Why does he say this is so important? Notice he says this in the verse. He says, why? Because by it, every now and then somebody gets hurt. No. He says many can become defiled. This is why I love the Bible. This was written a long time ago, in a completely different language. Do you know what a good translation people say is for this word defiled? It's this right here. What is it? Toxic. You ever go, man, that's just toxic? You're quoting the scripture. Why? Because there's roots, and roots run deep. And left alone, everything on the surface looks fine, but it's under there. In fact, here's what I would say. If you're someone who's ever been accused of being toxic, or if you're like, man, that's a toxic relationship, I would wager that what you're saying is that under the surface, there are some roots that are tangled up with a lot of hurt and pain that probably need to be cut out. And it's going to take effort and time and energy, and it's probably going to cost more than $250 and some machinery. But it's worth doing. I don't know, have you ever thought this? Have you ever thought about this? That the conflict that you think you're bearing and able to bear might be unbearable for the people around you. Like you're like, I'm fine, I'm okay with it. But your kids may not be. You're like, it's good, I'm all right, but it's hurting maybe others than you. And so the Bible's going, you should probably address that. Not only do we talk about personal wellness and relational wholeness, but the Bible's going to also say this, that when it comes to following Jesus, it will have the potential to affect what we would just call, I call it spiritual rightness, or your right relationship with God. And so, listen, I know you don't have to be a follower of Jesus to come here. In fact, I would wager that we're not all followers of Jesus. And so what I'm going to say next is pertaining to people who would follow Jesus. But if you're not a follower of Jesus, here's what I would encourage you to do. Just listen. Just listen in. Because the Bible has a lot to say to followers of Jesus about this aspect. In fact, the Bible seems to indicate, and we learned this all throughout our love passage, that when it comes to our relationships as people, we're not one-dimensional. Meaning it's not just with others, but that you were actually made for a relationship. We were built for a relationship that goes vertical to God and horizontal to others. And just like a regular x-axis, xy-axis, when you move one point, you kind of have to affect the whole slope of the thing. And so the Bible actually says this. We talked about this in our series. 1 John 4:20 says, if anyone says, I love God, which a lot of people say, I love God, and hates his brother, he's a liar. For the one who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. They're connected. In other words, if you're out there going, I love God, I hate everybody, the Bible goes, you're not telling the truth about one of those things. If you're like, I love everybody, but I don't necessarily have a relationship with God, the Bible's going to go, hey, you might be missing out on a level of love. It's a little bit like a bed sheet. I don't have an illustration for this or a picture, but I thought about it. It's a little bit like trying to put a fitted sheet on a king mattress by yourself. Have you ever done that? You got to be like an acrobat. Like Cirque du Soleil should just be like putting fitted sheets on mattresses, and everyone would be like, they'd be like, that's amazing. $50, here you go. Like, because what you'll find is that when you put one side on, and then you go the other side, you're like, that one pops off. You're like, over here. You go, why? Because they're connected. Eventually you're like, just forget it, right? I'll sleep on the mattress, which is gross. But anyway, like you put the sheet on, you understand that when you pull one side, it's going to pull on the other. And the Bible's going to say the exact same thing. That when it comes to your relationship with others and conflict, right? That the conflict that might be affecting you with your relationship with your friend, you're pulling on actually the relationship with God. And so you have the ability, actually, to negatively affect your relationship with God because of unresolved conflict horizontally with one another. And your relationship with God negatively. If that's not great, chances are your ability to bear up under conflict and love others with an otherworldly love is going to be affected. In fact, Jesus said something serious about this, which we had read for us. In fact, it was our teaching text for today. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 5. It says, so if you're offering your gift at the altar, which, by the way, he's talking to the masses, and he's basically referring something they would have all realized. They would have said, oh, you're talking about worship. That's how they would have worshiped. Their spiritual worship was to take a gift to the altar. He says, if you're doing that, and in the middle of it, you remember, now notice, that your brother or sister has something against you. Is he saying if you're offering your gift at the altar and you've got something against your brother? No. He's actually dialing up to like 11. He's like, if you're at the altar and you realize, oh, somebody's got an issue with me, like you're not the offender, you're the offendee. He goes, if you're on your way to church If you're singing a song, if you're about to bow your head and pray, and you realize there's somebody in your life that has unresolved conflict with you, what does he say? Leave your gift. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. What is he saying? Jesus seems to indicate that the best thing you could do is to have a hard conversation. And that by having that hard conversation, it actually might be more an act of worship than any song you could sing, by any prayer you could pray. That's crazy. Jesus goes, this is what I'm talking about. And if you're sitting there and going like, I don't know Jesus, but I don't know how that's possible, they're connected. Because the only way that that's even possible is if you know him. You're like, God, I need somebody to do that with me. And he's like, right. In fact, I thought this was a great question to ask ourselves. It's a telling question. Ask, is conflict the cause of my cold relationship with God? You see, it could be that you come from church to church, or you just come to our church or whatever, and you're like, man, I'm not feeling it. And you could be like, was it the music? I don't know. Was it the style of preaching? Was it coffee? Was it the lighting? What was it? And I just don't really feel like God's close. And God might be going, it might actually be unresolved conflict. It might actually be something in your life that is hindering you from actually connecting with me. You see, Jesus talks about this so much. It's actually why he came. See, conflict is unavoidable and left unresolved. It's costly. But the message of the Bible is this: the cost is why Jesus came. In fact, God cares so much about reconciliation, that he says, if you're willing to let me bear the cost of that reconciliation and that conflict, I'll even go to the cross and die to make that possible. And I'll come to life again so that you know that there is hope of renewal, and even the most dead things can live again, right? The most dead marriages in Christ can live again. The most dead work relationships, there are dead things that can come alive in Christ. In fact, Jesus said this, I want this to happen that they may know, or that they all may be one, just as you, he's talking to God the Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent us. You see, he's saying this, he's saying like, listen, if my followers are going to be ambassadors, that's in another section of Scripture, who carry a message of reconciliation, that God is reconciling the world to himself. Here's what God is saying: the world is in conflict with me. We were born in conflict with God. We want to do things our way, and we want to be our own boss. That's just human nature. And rather than be offended and unfriend the world, God goes, I'm the offended one, or I'm the offendee, but here's what I'll do. I'll actually go to that world that hates me, and I will love it, and I will die for it, so that so I can even save it from itself. See, God runs into conflict, especially with those who are enemies with him. That's what he does. And he goes, if my followers are going to carry that message about a God who runs into conflict and reconciles the world, it's not going to make sense if those people are unwilling to reconcile relationships. If God runs into the mess of the world, and we go, hey, God loved you so much to run to the mess, and then we don't do it ourselves, that doesn't make sense. In fact, growing up, I grew up in the 80s, yes, in the 80s, and that might be young or old to some of you, it's right in the middle, right? And watching Sesame Street, there used to be this song called Let's Sing One of These Things Is Not Like the Others. And the lyrics go like this, literally. One of these things is not like the others. One of these things just doesn't belong. Can you guess which thing is not like the others before I finish this song? And Bert's like, it's this pigeon right here, okay? Listen, what Sesame Street is saying is that people who don't reconcile relationships in their life and yet talk about a God who does not make sense. It doesn't make sense on Sesame Street, and it doesn't make sense on your street with your neighbors either. This is so important. It's so important because if we are to be people who say, I love God, we carry his message and his relationship, and we want people to actually know that. Jesus is like, how about you take me at my word and do some hard work? Because that's why I came. And in fact, if you read Matthew, you'll find out that he promises to be there. Okay, so chances are this is incredibly convicting. And I'm just going to say that because it's incredibly convicting to me. Right? And I'm guessing that maybe you're a person too. Because I think, as it said, I'm not aiming this at anyone, but I think it applies to everyone. And no doubt, here's what I think would happen today. You probably are sitting there and you're like, well, I got a lot more questions. Because you might be going, well, what about that one thing? And you don't understand how far and how difficult and how long does this take and what should I do? And I think there are tremendous questions that you have to answer before you even take a first step. But here's where I would point you. I would say that if what we're talking about and you're going, I want to know more, I would refer you back to our series called Resolve on Matthew 18. Because I think actually in Matthew 18, the entire chapter, Jesus lays out what it looks like for conflict resolution. In fact, he lists 7 steps to resolution. Or do I have 8? 8 steps. And they are all listed here for you. And as the tech team just continues to parse them through, Jesus has something to say about each one of these things. These are not steps that I came up with. These aren't steps that are invented. These are actually in the Bible. But I just want to point out to you, as you're trying to solve things in your mind or think through things in your mind, I'm willing to bet that your first response might be this one right here, number 5. That you might be sitting here and you're going, I think God is telling me to go to somebody. Is that what you're saying I need to do? Are you saying that we're canceling Thanksgiving dinner and it's just going to be a conflict resolution session? Because I'm not sure my family would like that. Here's what I'm saying. I'm not giving you an out. I'm giving you an out. But what I want to point out to you is that what you and I are tempted to do first is to start at number 5. I got to do number 5. And then if that doesn't work, number 6. In fact, some of us just jump straight to 6 and tell everybody in our life. Do you know about what they did? No, right? Or number 7, if you're in church world. Well, everybody in the church needs to know about this, right? But in Matthew 18, Jesus lists actually a few other steps. So I'd encourage you, don't start in the middle. Start at the beginning. Cool? So as the band comes up, here's what I'd like to do this morning just to kind of land our plane. I never do this. We don't do this at church. And if you're a guest with us and you're like, this is weird, the good news is we don't ever do this. So if you come back, we won't do it. Okay? But here's what I'd like to ask you to do. And it's probably not unfamiliar if you're in church world. But I'm just going to ask you that as the band comes up and they start playing, would you just bow your heads with me and close your eyes? I'm not going to ask you to come forward. I'm not going to make you stand up and resolve your conflict in front of everybody else. Okay? Just bow your head and close your eyes, because what I want to do is just talk to you for a second. I'm willing to bet it's entirely possible that while we have been talking, that there's probably been scenarios that come to your mind, or maybe even conversations that you've had. But I'm willing to bet that more than anything else than that, it's probably a name. It's probably a name. And so as the band just starts playing, here's what I'd love for you to do. Maybe just take a minute and sit with that name. And if you're a follower of Jesus, maybe just take a second and ask him what to do. Maybe you're just inviting him in and going, I don't know what to do, but I believe that you have the ability to bear some of that cost, and I would at least say that the cost is why you came. And if you're here and you're going, no, I think I'm good, maybe you're just going, hey, God, are there names? God, would you show me a name of someone that might have an issue with me? I just want to give you space to do that this morning. And before you build an argument, and before you build a case, and before you build a sentence or find a sentence and words for it, maybe you don't have words for it, I think it might be good to just simply say, I need help. And I need you, God. And I'm going to follow you down this path. Cool. So we'll keep our heads bowed and our eyes closed just for a little bit, and then we're going to start singing. We'll sing a song, and we'll be done. But if while your head is bowed and your eyes closed, you realize, hey, I don't necessarily have the words for that. I need someone to actually maybe pray with me or for me. Just want to let you know that there are people, while we sing, available to your left at the tables who would be willing to pray with you. Not in front of everybody, but they'd just be willing to talk to Jesus about your issue too. Father, we thank you for what you're doing, and we do need your help. So even ahead of Christmas and everything, we just corporately say that we need you.